Hello, this isn't a short lecture by any means. It's a little bit longer slide-wise, but it is a bonus lecture. In addition to the drugs of abuse lecture, this will only have a handful of questions on the exam, and they'll be pretty straightforward. I'll kind of point you in the direction I want you to study for the test. All right, I think it's essential to talk about the regulation of vitamins and supplements because it's quite a bit different than standard pharmaceutical products. So there's a lot of definitions out there. Technically, what a dietary supplement is something that is intended to supplement the diet. It contains some kind of vitamin, mineral, herb, botanical, or amino acid, and supplements either by offering something that's not normally in the diet or by increasing total intake. So it can be things that are normally found in food and a standard diet, but just extra, or it can be something that isn't isn't necessarily found in the standard diet, but it kind of blurs the line because there's a lot of herbal and botanical things that are used quote unquote medicinally or as marketed as such, but they aren't necessarily things that would be found in a standard diet. So it's a little interesting to talk about because a dietary supplement isn't always just supplementing something that should be in the diet, if that makes sense. Although I understand it doesn't, but hopefully the contradiction there makes sense. As far as herbs and botanicals, people will use different terms for these kind of interchangeably. Botanical is basically something that comes from a plant. Some people call them herbal products. That's sort of the term I like to use. Nutraceutical is something I hear, which is a term that kind of bothers me because it just sounds like a made-up word. And then this is, again, the FDA's definition of a dietary supplement here. Yeah, you can see that there. Okay. Okay, couple interesting supplement facts. About 50% of people in the US regularly take some form of vitamin. This is a huge industry. It's a $30 billion industry. So it's quite powerful from a congressional lobbying perspective. Not as powerful as the pharmaceutical industry, but it's still has a lot of weight it can throw around using dollars and donations and things like that to make sure legislation keeps it that way. Recommendations as far as supplements go, most people don't tell their primary care provider that they're taking supplements. They might just consider them over the counter or kind of extra to their standard health care. So it's always important to ask people just so you can get a full picture, because sometimes you might talk to somebody and like, oh, I don't take any medications. Like, well, do you take any vitamins or over-the-counter supplements? Oh yeah, I take a bunch. And then so that might give you a different view on how they treat their health and that they maybe like to take ownership of theirs personally, or maybe have the mentality that products that are herbal or supplemental are more natural and safer, and so that might help tailor your treatment to that person. Most people don't start based on the advice of a healthcare provider. They're usually friends or family, or they're doing their own quote unquote. This is my favorite thing in modern day is internet research, which you can generally think what happens is these companies are pretty smart, so they capitalize on Google algorithms. So if you search some sort of a supplement, it's probably the first couple of hits are going to be websites that are trying to sell you that supplement by offering you claims and research, and most of this research is pretty hollow or bogus, and the claims are often quite overstated for most of the benefits to these products. Celebrities like Dr. Oz, he's definitely the most notorious one out there, who seems to have a promotion of some kind of a random supplement that he thinks is the greatest thing since sliced bread, that he promotes on his show, and he's very blatant about it, about things that cause weight loss or prevent cancer or things like that. He actually was pulled in front of Congress for misleading claims, which is pretty impressive considering all the misleading claims that are out there, and he actually caught some people's attention enough to actually have to testify in front of Congress for why he's in front of a live audience misleading the public directly and speaking about claims that are not backed by any science. So that was, if you want to look it up, you can look at that, and I think it's pretty funny personally. Sad, but funny. GNC is a store I like to rag on a lot. the people working there may or may not have any training or background in healthcare. They're offering advice on supplements that they probably don't fully understand, or they've been told by the companies what it's supposed to do, and a lot of times it borders on medical advice, and that's where I get really frustrated. It's a big line that's crossed, in my opinion, where you're offering something that might help or boost something or supplement something, and at the end of the day you start to buy into it enough where you're saying that it's going to do certain things that aren't backed by science and aren't even tested by the company. In fact, no one's even done the research to show that it does anything, or maybe if there is any research out there, it's very small populations, it's small amounts of people, and it's probably not a very well designed study. Why? Because there's no money in studying supplements, so people don't do it, and it's a $30 billion industry. And think about it, this these companies that make supplements are raking in $30 billion a year, and it's probably quite a bit more than that now. That's kind of an old figure. But anyway, billions of dollars a year, and not really having to spend much on research and development. Why would they want to do that if they can sell their products without it? So that's the big thing there. The Washington Post did a kind of an interesting study a few years ago. This is a different thing. This is Congress and Dr. Oz, which is kind of interesting. I think I have a different article, and that might have been New York Times. I can't remember. It's coming up. Anyway, get there in a second. So just in case you're wondering about supplements and why we are where we are today, prior to 1994, dietary supplements were actually regulated by the FDA. They had to prove safety and efficacy depending on what the claim was on the bottle, so much like drugs are. In 1994, there's a Dietary Supplement Health Education Act, or aka DSHEA, which Congress approved dietary supplements to be a separate entity from pharmaceuticals, standard pharmaceuticals. So they said it's not a food or a drug, and these products can affect a function of the body, but they can't be intended to treat, prevent, cure, or diagnose disease. Now, of course, many people take these because they believe, or they've been told that they will treat, prevent, or cure, diagnose a disease. So it's a really interesting thing that they have to be very careful on their labels what they can say. But as far as what the general public believes, it can be quite different. And so this was very likely brought about by some heavy lobbying on the supplement industry's side to allow for less regulation in their arena, so that they wouldn't have to prove safety or efficacy claims. And technically they have to have some evidence, and I'll show you that in a second, but it's really loose, and ultimately there's no oversight body for them. And so the only way anyone's ever going to investigate a supplement for safety and efficacy is if they cause some harm to the public, and that's unfortunate, but that's just the case of these products. So the big thing to remember, dietary supplements are not FDA approved for anything. Pre-market testing and approval is not required, so you can bring any supplement you want to market and claim certain things about it, as long as you don't cross that threshold. And I'll talk about some of the labeling claims that are good and some that are not so good in a second here. Safety and efficacy data are not required. However, manufacturers are supposed to have information on file to support any efficacy claims that they make. But again, no one actually reviews this information. The government doesn't have an agency that oversees this, so there's whatever they have on file. It could be like a 10-person survey of people who took their product who said that their memory improved on it. Okay, well, there's their efficacy data. So again, there's no real way to catch bad products right now. That's a huge problem in this area, and it's, again, basically these companies are innocent until proven guilty. And so the FDA can step in legally if a product presents a health risk to people. They can ban a product if they think it's a hazard. Ephedra was something that came up a while ago. It was marketed as a weight loss herbal product, and it ended up kind of acting like a stimulant. It should sound to you similar to like Sudafed or pseudoephedrine. It's kind of similar to that. And it was causing cardiovascular issues, and people had cardiovascular related complications taking it, and the FDA banned it. So that's one example, and I think the only one in modern history, recent history, where we've had something like that. Now, fortunately, most dietary supplements are quite safe and benign. They don't really, the flip side of that, they don't do a whole lot, but they don't really cause side effects or toxicity. So that's good, but it still doesn't necessarily get us out of the woods as far as how do we know that these are completely safe, and do we know everything about how they might interact with other drugs and things like that? The answer is no. All right, so I already got into this. I kind of went off on my soapbox already, but again, just to review quick, so these products aren't evaluated like drugs. They don't have to. There's no financial incentive, and there's no real government funding for research and development either. It's not like there's tons of dollars out there for academic institutions to research the effects of vitamin D. Well, vitamin D is a bad example because that's actually got a lot of studies behind it. But let's pick something more obscure like saw palmetto and prostate health. There's not really a lot of money or people wanting to do that. If it is, it's small studies or small, or maybe animal models, things like that. I do want to be clear that I'm not saying there's nothing out there that's effective. There are some herbal remedies that have some benefits, and we'll talk about some of these. And some places in the world, like in some European countries, they actually do regulate herbs like drugs, and they are dispensed with prescriptions and things like that. But at the end of the day, a lot of the herbal products just don't have a solid body of evidence, especially when you consider the wide breadth of claims that some of these companies are making when they're talking about why drugs are, or why the herbal product is used, or what it might be helpful with. And at the end of the day, you have a lack of research overall to support any of that, any of those claims or any of those beliefs behind the product. And I'm kind of the mindset too that pharmaceutical companies aren't stupid. So if they find that, well, this herbal product A works really well to lower somebody's blood pressure, why wouldn't I just take herbal product A and figure out what's the compound within that herbal product that's active to lower blood pressure, turn it into a pharmaceutical grade product, and then sell it as an actual drug? And that's exactly what people do. So pharmaceutical companies are actually pretty adept in having people work in locating new drug sources. So they might look at animals with like animal toxins or plants in various parts of the world that are maybe used medicinally by local people or may have some thought to have some medicinal properties, and they might try and see if they can isolate compounds from there that might be the next drug. And that is one interesting area of research. So I'm kind of, again, when you have the pharmaceutical industry with all the money they have, it's sort of like they're going to sniff something out if they can. So that makes me a little even more cautious to understand the need for herbal products on the market, because again, the stuff that's probably more effective has already been turned into a drug. At least that's how I would picture it now. Again, that's not a complete picture, but it is I think an interesting idea at least. Okay, so what can you say? You can make structure and function claims, like you can say maintains a healthy urinary tract, but you also have to have a disclaimer that says this statement has not been evaluated by the FDA, product not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent a disease. So any over-the-counter vitamin and supplement that's not FDA approved for a certain thing will have that behind it. Health claims, FDA authorized, some health claims are after, reduces the risk of osteoporosis. So you can actually have an FDA authorized health claim. So for example, like calcium and vitamin D, if you make those products as a supplement company, you could ask the FDA to authorize those because there is maybe evidence to support that particular claim. So certain things might be able to get away with more aggressive claims that are considered appropriate than other things that simply don't have any evidence. So, but the other problem is that again, there's not really a lot of oversight here. So it'd probably take a consumer to say, well, I bought this Cran Max and it says, instead of this, let's say it says cures urinary tract infections. Well, that's and then I took it and my urinary tract infection didn't get better. So then you filed a complaint with the company, then yada, yada, yada. The FDA figured it out and sent a letter to the company saying to stop making this product unless you relabel it with something else. So that can happen. But again, it's going to take some, there's nothing really stopping a company right now from going to market with some of these products that might have mislabeled claims or labeling claims that aren't FDA approved. And that stuff can get through. Just again, because this area is sort of gray when it comes to regulation. So things you can't say. You can say treats hypertension or implied disease claim, like controls blood pressure. Same thing there, right? This is one of my favorite ones, is that you can imply disease claims in the name of the product, but not actually in the description of it. So interesting. This one's called Cold and Flew Away. which makes it sound like it gets rid of your cold and your flu. So what, does it cure my cold? Does it cure my flu? What exactly does it do? No, you couldn't say that, but in the name you can say that. Or you could make your product for migraine treatment called Migraine Be Gone. There's nothing against the law about having the actual name say that, which is, I think, really interesting. Also, some minor symptoms associated with life stages are not considered diseases. So you could make claims for things like, treats hot flashes, or, treats PMS symptoms, prevents mild acne, prevents wrinkles, it helps with mild memory loss, stuff like that wouldn't be considered unallowable. Now, if you said, instead of helps with mild memory loss, said helps with Alzheimer's disease, that would be crossing that line there. Good manufacturing practices are standards that the FDA enforces on different types of manufacturers. So it's basically designed to have medications and food production controlled for identity, purity, quality, composition, and strength. And GMP practices, so any pharmaceutical company has to follow GMP. If they don't, they'll get shut down. It basically makes it so like you can't, for just a kind of a dumb example, I remember I used to work in a pharmaceutical lab and I had to watch this video, and they showed you an example of like these two people mixing, like tablets in the tablet actual powder in like giant mixing bowls, and they're right next to each other, and the dust from both powders was getting into the other bowl, and obviously it's cross contamination. But if you're lazy and your facility is not built to separate the or clean well enough in between batches, you could easily get some crossover. And so that's why GMP is really important. There's lots of guidelines on how to manufacture so that you keep your product pure. And of course, there's testing involved with that too, batch testing, quality assurance, and things like that. GMP was only recently required for supplements. So in 2007, they phased it in over 3 years based on the number of employees. Technically, all supplements now should follow GMP. It's a little scary to me that companies before 2007 didn't have to follow good manufacturing practices, because who knows what kind of sketchy conditions they could have been making supplements in. And these are ultimately things people are ingesting into their body. So worst case scenario, or best case scenario, your supplement, if your supplement's adulterated, it doesn't have the right stuff in it, and you take vitamin A and it's actually vitamin D or something like that, it's probably not going to do anything in the long run. But like worst case scenario, it's got adulterated with some kind of a toxin or some kind of an impurity, or something in the factory got into it that's tainting it, and that could cause illness potentially in patients. GMP also prevents the following things: adulteration, misbranding, and non-standardization. Adulteration means that there's something in the product that shouldn't be. So you have, again, a product that says it's vitamin D, 1,000 units, and you test it, and you find there's lisinopril in there. I don't know, I'm just making stuff up, but you get the point. There's something in there that shouldn't be. Misbranding is saying something that's not correct on the label, and non-standardization would be a non-standardization of the process behind making the product. I kind of talked about that. All right, standardized label claims. Products can have high potency, certified potency, and guaranteed potency. They can put those on their label, but that doesn't mean anything. Anyone can write that on a label without testing it at all. So there's a lot of industries out there that advertise like this, and supplements are certainly like it, where they have some kind of a thing on there that's designed to market their product, but they don't have to have anything that actually backs that up. There's a study. There's a lot of studies out there like this, but there's one I found, a 1998 study of somebody looked at a bunch of different St. John's wort products and did assays on them, and find they contained anywhere from 20 to 140% of the label claim, which is actually pretty impressive. I'm surprised it wasn't worse than that. But they actually looked at a bunch of kind of mainstream supplement brands at the time, and compared to pharmaceuticals industry, you have to have a certain range. Usually it's 85 to 105%, or 110%, I think, of the label claim. And most pharmaceutical companies target a much tighter range than that. So they try to get, within, let's say, 95 to 105% or something like that. So for most products, you're right in that target of what is on the label, and this you could be taking 20% of your St. John's wort, assuming you even know what a St. John's wort therapeutic dose is, which is debatable. You're still basically taking a subtherapeutic dose. There are third-party evaluations that people can contract with. The most common one is USP, or United States Pharmacopoeia. USP is a benchmark when it comes to testing products of all types. So like pharmaceutical companies use USP recommended tests to check for the purity of their products. So like if you're doing quality assurance on a aspirin tablet at a pharmaceutical company, it's a bad example because that's technically, well, that's a pharmaceutical, but it's over the counter. Let's say lisinopril. Let's keep on that train. You're going to be testing not only that it has the right amount of lisinopril in it, so then USP will tell you which tests are approved for that, and then you will run like the HPLC assay or whatever it is to figure that out. But you'll also be testing to make sure there aren't impurities in there, and there are certain impurities that USP requires you test for. And so all pharmaceutical batches have to undergo these testings and have to get approved, or they'll send it back and not distribute it to the public. So a company, if they wanted to, can contract with the United States Pharmacopoeia or a lab that can run USP assays, and then passing that ensures that that contains the actual ingredients written on the label, amount and strength on the label, meets requirements for contamination limits, and compliant with GMP standards. This also requires them to do periodic off-the-shelf audits if they are, again, contracted with USP. The only company that I know of for sure that does some USP testing is Nature Made, and I'm not trying to advertise for them at all, but they're just one for sure that I know that does put the USP sticker on their label, so they do independent testing. As far as I know, I don't think anyone else does regularly. And the tricky thing is not all Nature Made products use USP. So some of them you'll notice don't have the purity sticker on them. ConsumerLab.com and NSF International, I'm not really concerned you know them. I don't think they're used a whole lot. ConsumerLab.com randomly just tests products on a retail level, but it'll cost money, so you have to pay the company and they have to go. But using USP also costs money too. NSF International is an independent testing company as well. So again, you might see these things like here's the Nature Made bottle with the USP sticker on it. So theoretically, if they put that on there, it should mean that they're doing that. Now, are they actually doing that? Is there anyone actually testing that they're contracted with some kind of a lab that runs USP tests on it? Again, I don't think anyone's actually looking into that, but at least they're claiming they are, which is more than most supplement companies do. Oh, this is the example I was kind of going on about earlier. So there's a New York Attorney General investigation that they looked at a bunch of products taken randomly from different New York stores, including large chains like GNC, Target, Walgreens, Walmart, looking at store brands. And they did DNA testing on a bunch of different supplements, which is a little bit questionable whether or not you can track a supplement that way, or whether the supplement you'd be able to test for DNA in a supplement. But anyway, that's what they did. And they mimicked it off a Canadian study that had similar findings. And basically they found that 4/5 of the products they tested didn't contain any detectable amount of labeled ingredients. They basically found different fruit and vegetable DNA, and that's illegal. So even though there's no regulation in an adulterated product of any kind, because these products, remember, have to follow good manufacturing practices, that would be illegal. So I don't know what exactly happened with this. I never read the follow-up. My guess is nothing. They probably got tied up in litigation. I'm not sure, but it doesn't seem like anything ever really happened with it. I think a lot of the companies just sort of release public statements saying, well, we don't, like Target and Walgreens and Walmart and GNC, I don't think any of these companies actually make their own supplements. They probably just buy them from some company that makes all the supplements, or a lot of the supplements. There's probably a couple big ones out there that sell them, and then a company can put their generic Target or Walgreens label on it. So they kind of threw their hands up and say, well, we just buy them from some other place. We just assume that they're doing their job. And in this case, at least according to this investigation, they didn't. It's kind of an interesting article. I linked it down here. It's a little old, but still relevant and interesting if you want to look at it. Ephedrine is a stimulant similar to vasopressor or pseudoephedrine. Releases tissue stores of norepinephrine. It's a really common use. We talked about it in OB briefly. That's pretty much where it's used most often. But it's also used just in case you need something to bump up blood pressure, like in the OR. If you've got somebody sedated, you might use ephedrine. But they were slipping ephedrine into a weight loss stimulants in the 90s as ephedra. So I mentioned this already. And again, you had cardiovascular related effects. There's another product called DMAA, that had similar effects to ephedrine. It was another analog. So what happens is you get these people who take ephedrine or the molecule, and they might make it a little different in the lab, but still have the same effects, and throw it into a different type of supplement, market it as weight loss. Combine it with something like caffeine, and then you get, a weird illegal product that's technically a clandestine drug on the market. It's not even close to a supplement. But anyway, so stuff like this happens. It gets slipped in and marketed that way. It's very difficult to catch it because you don't really know what you're looking for as an investigator. So again, the FDA kind of has to wait until there's a bunch of complaints in the community, and then they can investigate what these people took. So after I said all that, are you wondering to yourself why people even take supplements? Well, maybe. I am a huge, I totally admit, by the way, that I'm a huge skeptic when it comes to supplements, but I do think that there's a lot of issues with them, especially the way they're made and the way that they're tested, and the overall lack of testing and regulation and evidence behind them makes me very worried about the use of them. And I think, again, I kind of said earlier that there's not a whole lot of health risks with taking them. I think they're relatively safe. My biggest problem, I think, is that people may think that they're going to do more than they should. So it's sort of like this false belief or false hope. It might cure a disease or help a disease, so it might actually delay treatment of something important that they could have used a pharmaceutical product that's actually proven to work for. So at the end of the day, I think there are a lot of legitimate uses for vitamins and supplements. We've talked about a few of them already throughout this course, but since they're OTC, insurance won't cover them, so people are paying out of pocket, so you get a lack of medical record documentation. So the first thing to do when you're meeting with a patient, especially if it's the first time, is make sure you know if they're on any supplements or vitamins and update that in their chart. And at the end of the day, people take these because they want to be healthy. They aren't taking these because they're trying to spite me. Oh, that pharmacist doesn't think that supplements work, I should take a supplement. And that's ridiculous, right? But people want to be healthy. They assume these are natural products. They're just good for them. They just think that, well, my diet's not that great, I need to supplement it with something. Most people who take supplements aren't opposed to traditional medicine or Western medicine, although some people may be and may be taking them differently. The term complementary alternative medicine, or CAM, gets thrown around a lot. I'll let you be the judge of which one's the correct way, but CAM is kind of a common way to say it. And I like to think about it this way, though, like something that's complementary works in conjunction with your other therapies. So not only other medications, but other preventative measures and things like that. Whereas alternative would be like, well, I'm not going to take the traditional one, I'm going to take this instead. So I kind of get annoyed a little bit that complementary and alternative get combined that way because it's a different concept. But anyway, that's just me. I think most patients end up getting convinced by advertising or word of mouth or something like that. And so it's important for healthcare providers to be function as the middleman to kind of just be able to discuss the actual use of the drug or the supplement, why people might take it, what it might do. I've had so many people ask me, like, if I'm interviewing somebody in the hospital and they're like, oh, I'm on all these supplements and I don't even know if they really do anything. Like, what do you think? It's a really hard question to answer because I don't want to be a jerk. Say, well, they don't do anything. Like, stop taking them all. And their primary care provider might have actually recommended them, and then I'm stepping on somebody's toes. So usually I just sort of say what I told you in much less words, right? That, well, there's not a lot of studies on there about them, or if there is something on the specific things they are, like these medications might work, these supplements might work for this, or why are you taking this many, or do you have trouble remembering to take them? A lot of people I find that they don't even remember to take their vitamins or supplements half the time. So it's like, well, why are you taking it if you only remember it once a week? So at the end, again, there's a lot of variables here, but it's a good opportunity to have a conversation with your patient about not only medications but also their supplement taking and just why they're doing it, and if they actually perceive a benefit there, they just feel like they have to take it. Some people are like, oh, I just feel like everyone tells me to take a multivitamin, so I have to do it. And it's like, you don't need to if you don't want to. You can focus on a balanced diet. You can eat more vegetables and fruits and get your stuff that way, and that's going to be probably more effective, if not or at least as effective as taking a regular supplement regimen. So anyway, I want to leave you with one story and something, a product I saw on TV a while ago called Prevagen, which perked my interest. My wife was watching some kind of silly show, and I remember there's a commercial where this came up, and I just remember listening to them on TV and being like, what are they talking about? They're talking about this product called Prevagen that they're saying like helps with your memory, and all these really great claims that were definitely illegal on TV. And then I went to their website and it was even more illegal. And so what Prevagen is, this is really interesting. So that's just an example of how things just get to market and stay there, even though they're really just nothing. This is not a product that anyone should take. So it's Apwecorin, I think is what it's called. Anyway, this is what they claim is in Prevagen, which is a synthetic protein that's derived from the compound that is part of the bioluminescence process in certain jellyfish. So somehow somebody found this protein and decided that they needed to put it into a synthetic form, market it as a brain health, aka memory supplement. It's made by a company in Wisconsin, so kind of close to home. And interestingly, as well, that as far as I did my research, FDA investigated this company in 2012 and found several violations. And as far as I know, there's no update on it. I think the litigation is still pending, which just shows you how hard it is to remove one of these products from the market. Some of their claims, some of the FDA's issues with it were that a big parts were the unsubstantiated claims on their website, things saying like first and only dietary supplement that protects brain cells from death. That's an insane claim that they can't back up with any science whatsoever. And they're kind of leading it sort of, well, if Aquaporin, if I can say that right, is actually a drug or is actually doing these things, then it's a drug. It's not a supplement if it can do all this, incredible stuff. So the Federal Trade Commission also slammed them for false and unsubstantiated claims. So there's also a class action lawsuit in 2015, and so which brought to light a number of things. First of all, it's a protein. Remember what happens? How do we take proteins? We inject them. All the proteins we've talked about in this class have to be injected. You can't ingest a protein and have it get absorbed systemically. It just doesn't work that way. Your stomach is designed to break down proteins into some very small peptides or individual amino acids as it goes through the digestive process. And so this is just a product that if it was a synthetic protein intact, it's not going to go anywhere. And likely the only thing that you'd be ingesting with this is end up getting a small amount of random amino acids. It doesn't work. There's no evidence that this particular product had any effect in humans beforehand, and no evidence that it does now. The studies on Prevagen claim on their website is basically survey data that a ninth grader could probably put together if they wanted to. I think that there's some other published literature on them that basically says that there's no effect whatsoever. This is essentially a placebo. Some people also reported a variety of side effects that said weren't documented or were ignored by the company. Anyway, so yeah, it's also expensive. It's like $1 to $2 a day for treatment, so it's not a cheap product either. And the company recommends taking a full 90 days for the effect. Now, again, I don't think that this lawsuit's been resolved. I know the FDA, the current commissioner last year, came out with some more strong language about supplement industry and saying we're going to be, taking it to these companies that are making these claims, which I think is hopefully a good thing. This, in my opinion, is a product that shouldn't exist. It should be illegal to make a product like this. It's misleading to the public. There's no science behind it. If you look into it just a little bit, this is again something that if you go to their website, it sounds pretty good. You start to look under the curtain a little bit, or look behind the curtain a little bit, and it just that there's nothing about this that makes any sense. And the fact that this product is on the market and people are paying money for it, because somebody who doesn't know any better looks at it and says, oh, it's a memory support, or I saw this, or Walgreens sells this. If Walgreens has it on their shelf, it must be good. And actually, I wrote a letter to Walgreens, an email, just to wonder. I'm like, why do you, did you know this product is under investigation by the FDA? This is when I was on my tirade back in 2014 or something like that, a while ago, and complained about them supporting this product, and they responded to my email with a recommendation of which Walgreens near me contained this product and where I could go to buy it, and something like, oh, I'm sorry, we were sold out of it. And they didn't, obviously it was like a robo reply, they didn't even read it. So strange. Yeah. I just don't understand how a product like this can exist as an over-the-counter supplement. There's no sense behind it. And as far as I know, again, the FDA hasn't been able to. I think they did get them to reverse some of their claims on their website, to update some of their and remove some of their videos and things like that. But you can still buy Prevagen. And I know it might seem unfair that I'm picking on this really, really terrible product from a terrible company. I think any company that's willing to put out a product like this has serious ethical issues. However, I'm sure there are many more examples on the market like that. So again, this is what consumers are going up against, companies that don't have a moral standard and are willing to put something like this on the market, when clearly anybody could hire a simple scientist. Anyone with any background in chemistry or biology could tell you that this product isn't real, that couldn't do that, what it says. And then you also have just the idea that information, the FDA investigations, the class action suits like that, they aren't enough to pull it from the market temporarily even. So it's not like we can even say, well, let's hold off on you selling it while we resolve this. Nope, they're still selling it, and that's and again, it's not like they're giving it away, right? They're charging quite a premium for their product. So the whole thing is just very, very poor representation of the industry as a whole. And again, there are a lot of companies out there that make supplements and are hopefully doing a decent job with it. This is not one of them. All right, so now that we talked about that stuff, let's talk about some of the actual vitamins and supplements that we haven't spent as much time on. Oh, this is my joke. I think a lot of people think, well, I can add a multivitamin into my poor diet and eat the diet. And actually, there have been a few studies. I shouldn't say a lot. There's some evidence out there that looks at people who might supplement their diet naturally by adding fruits and vegetables and things like that. So having more of a balanced diet versus supplementing with a vitamin tablet or capsule, and you just don't get the same effects. And in fact, a lot of the evidence, like if you look at populations, for example, that get a lot of omega-3s in their diet naturally, compared to people who supplement omega-3s, you just don't see the same benefits with the supplements as you do in the natural ingestion of the product. And so that's just, it's kind of a pretty well-documented trend within the supplement as far as taking supplements. But it doesn't mean we shouldn't use them at all. They better than nothing for some people. So vitamins, they all have a standard and a chemical name. For example, vitamin C is ascorbic acid. I do want you to know which vitamins are fat soluble. They're A, D, E, and K. All the others are water soluble. So basically just C and the multitude of B vitamins. Most people get plenty of all these vitamins through dietary intake, enteric synthesis, or intrinsic synthesis. There are a couple that we might run short on here and there, but for the most part, we can get these fairly readily through our diet. So what exactly is a vitamin? A vitamin is basically some kind of a cofactor that works with metabolic processes or enzymatic reactions, and also usually has some free radical scavenging properties, aka it's an antioxidant. Do I need to take a daily multivitamin? That's the real question. That depends. How's your diet? If you don't eat a lot of fruits and vegetables, then yeah, probably. If your patient doesn't eat fruits or vegetables at all, it's probably not a bad idea. I think, again, there's very little risk to taking a multivitamin, so it's probably going to help more than it'll hurt. But if you have a patient who's struggling to afford things, or one extra medication, they hate taking pills, and one extra thing is going to break the bank, it might not be worth recommending it. That's certainly the first thing I would look at cutting if you had a patient who he's on a bunch of stuff that you deem important, but maybe they're just struggling with taking so many medications a day. Cutting down their supplement regimen might be something to consider. Deficiencies, if your patient is malnourished, or if they have a condition that makes them malnourished, like if they're anorexic or alcoholic patients. Some patients may have genetic deficiencies too. The nice thing about vitamins is that it's very hard to get toxic at all, and toxicity is basically impossible from natural sources. You can eat a ton of fruits and vegetables, and you're not going to absorb more vitamin than you need. Supplements you can, but again, the consequences of that are very low. Usually, if anything, you might feel a little sick to your stomach, but you're probably not going to get hurt. With the exception of probably this one, which is vitamin A. Vitamin A, retinol or dihydroretinol. There are different types of retinols. We talked about some of the retin type products, the retinoids and things like that, like tretinoin and retin A and those different products for acne. Those are vitamin A analogs. Present in plant carotenoids, so like leafy green, yellow vegetables, obviously carrots, beta carotene, lycopene, lutein. Those are all types of vitamin A's. Thought to be antioxidants. Again, most vitamins have some antioxidant capability. They're also present in some proteins too, like fish, meats, and dairy products. They're stored in the fat cells and the liver. Usually role in eyesight, cofactor in forming mucus cells. We use that to treat acne. Again, different analogs used to treat acne. It's probably the biggest pharmaceutical use for vitamin A. Again, I go back to my example of if a drug company can market one of these things for an actual condition they can sell, they're going to. So here you go. Deficiencies, people are deficient in vitamin A. Again, it affects eyesight, so usually you might have night blindness or dry eyes, which can lead to infection, and ultimately severe vitamin A deficiency could lead to blindness. Lots of different oral over-the-counter supplements, and of course the prescription variants are mostly, or most of the acne variants are prescription only. There are some topical products that you can get without a prescription now. This is probably the most toxic supplement we'll talk about, and that's stretching things. It's not that toxic, but basically with vitamin A, if you take it long-term at significantly higher than recommended daily intake, it can cause some increase in certain risks. So for example, like lung cancer risk for smokers, loss of appetite, liver damage, GI bleeding, bone muscle pain, teratogenicity. So especially for pregnant patients, to make sure that if they're taking a prenatal, they aren't taking more vitamin A on top of that. Acute toxicity can give pretty severe GI upset, blurred vision, muscular, and coordination issues. It's probably, again, the most toxic supplement, either taken short-term or chronically or acutely in overdose. Vitamin D, I think like everyone who comes in the hospital takes vitamin D. There's a lot of different forms of it, there's not a lot. There's two different forms of it available. There's D2 and D3. We talked about these already, so I'm not going to rehash it too much, but vitamin D, I just think it's an interesting thing that it's one of the only vitamins. It's the only vitamin that our body synthesizes, so we get it from UVB light with very small amounts of exposure, and that's why people in northern climates tend to be deficient, because we don't get a lot of sun exposure in the winter months, and even if we do, it's not the right wavelength of light for us to synthesize vitamin D. So a lot of times it's recommended for people to supplement because a lot of people in Minnesota and other northern climates are just deficient based on that. But you can supplement it in your diet. A lot of things are fortified with vitamin D, so that's another way you could do it, or you could take a supplement too. Again, it's sort of interesting if you look at the studies that look at vitamin D supplementation, and if you take it, you don't really see, even if you target a therapeutic level, you don't necessarily see a benefit from certain diseases with that. But it sort of falls in my mind as sort of that common sense type thing. You're deficient in something, let's supplement it. Worst case scenario, nothing happens. Best case scenario, you maybe prevent some diseases from occurring or getting worse. And that's sort of the mindset, I think, of the recommendations behind vitamin D. Calcium requires vitamin D to facilitate absorption. And so those two are usually given together. You supplement both. If you just give calcium and the person's vitamin D deficient, you're not going to absorb a whole lot of calcium. Our clinical role, talked about this under prevention and treatment of osteoporosis. It's widely used for that. And even for that, we talked about sort of the controversy behind the evidence, that there's not solid or robust evidence for that. But at the same time, I'll fall back on my old, logically, yes, if you aren't getting a lot of calcium and vitamin D from your diet or from natural sources, in the case of sunlight and vitamin D, you're not going to be, you don't really give yourself a fair fighting chance in here, so you might as well try it. I think it's generally widely recommended to at least offer it to people as an option who are especially at risk for osteoporosis or osteopenic. Other roles outside of osteoporosis are really theoretical, and there's not a lot of good evidence to support them. I've listed several here. Mental health, the only big study I know of that said it was positive was one that looked at using fluoxetine alone versus fluoxetine plus vitamin D. So I think this is probably one of the areas where I see recommendations a lot where people will try and treat depression with vitamin D. Oh, you just need some vitamin D. It'll, it's known to help with depression. It's really not. There's no good evidence out there that says taking vitamin D by itself treats depression. And if it is, it's very mild or very, small amounts of cases. There's lots of interesting theories about deficiency correlations with vitamin D. For example, if you were pregnant with a child and were deficient with vitamin D, they might be more likely to develop type 1 diabetes or schizophrenia or more MS, multiple sclerosis, or just generally more likely to die. So comparing different climates and the prevalence there, that's one of the theories out there, but there's not, it's just, again, it's a theory. There's not a lot of evidence to really support it. I just think it's kind of interesting that people would go to, well, a lot more people with European history get type 1 diabetes. Well, must be the vitamin D. Well, there's probably some other things at play there too. Sources and supplements, there's a ton of foods that are fortified. Fish and meats of all kinds tend to be high in vitamin D. And the sun obviously is a catch-22, good for vitamin D, bad for skin cancer, sorry. Supplements range anywhere from 400 units to 50,000 units. The 50,000 unit one is a prescription only. So what happens sometimes is that people who are really low will take the 50,000 unit like once or twice a week for a month or two, and then they'll switch over to a daily one after that once they're boosted up. Kind of think of it like a loading dose over a longer period of time. Toxicity is minimal. You can't get too vitamin D toxic from too much sun, only via supplements. It's not like your body will keep making vitamin D until you get toxic. It just kind of shuts off the process, from what I understand. If you did get too much vitamin D, it might be hypercalcemic, GI side effects, potentially muscle pain, but nothing really. Kidney cardiac damage may be possible, but it's not going to likely happen to many people. Even though it's fat soluble, so you can't just pee it out, you're still not going to see a huge amount of toxicity with vitamin D supplementation overdoses. All right, vitamin E, or aka tocopherols, the role to protect cell membranes from oxidation and destruction. It's a free radical scavenger, it protects fatty acids. Deficiency can be related to CV events, or what was thought to be. However, when they studied this, they looked at people with cardiovascular events and found some correlation between events and low vitamin E levels. They supplemented with vitamin E and showed that it wasn't really beneficial. In fact, it actually did the opposite. High amounts of vitamin D caused increases in cardiovascular events. Vitamin E is really abundant in the diet. It's probably one that most people don't need to supplement directly. There's lots of things that contain it. So as long as you eat like a somewhat balanced diet, you're probably getting plenty of vitamin E on a regular basis. Toxicity, again, it's probably safe. If you are going to, it's probably relatively safe. If you are going to take it, make sure you cap it at 400 units a day. Higher amounts show increases in all-cause mortality. It also might affect vitamin K's clotting role a little bit, so it has been linked in some cases to hemorrhagic stroke risk increasing. Medicinal uses, there's nothing really out there that's a shoo-in for vitamin E. Macular degeneration, formulated vitamins. There's a vitamin that's called the Arids vitamin that has vitamin E in it, and vitamin A, and a couple other things. that's supposed to help with preventing macular degeneration. We talked about that during the eye lecture briefly, but it's, again, not well studied or proven. There's some minor evidence that shows that it could slow Alzheimer's progression. And some people think it helps prevent tardive dyskinesia when using antipsychotic therapy. So you might see like a schizophrenic patient on an antipsychotic on vitamin E. Phytonadione, vitamin K, most notoriously used to reverse warfarin bleeding, and that's pretty much the only use of it. It's obviously a very important cofactor for making clotting factors. So if you're malnourished, you're going to see people's INRs up sometimes just because they aren't producing clotting factors because they aren't getting any vitamin K. Vitamin K is actually synthesized by GI bacteria, or it's obtained from food sources, fish oils, meats, leafy green vegetables. Toxicity is minimal. If you take too much vitamin K, you can basically, you produce enough clotting factor to bring yourself back down to normal, but your body's clotting factor production is rate limiting. It's not like you'll overproduce clotting factor. But if you are trying to reverse warfarin and you give somebody a lot of vitamin K, they're going to make clotting factors for longer periods of time, and you're going to be reversed for a longer period of time. So just keep that in mind. If you don't want them, reversed off of warfarin for a week, don't give them a huge whopping dose of vitamin K. Toxicity is quite minimal. Vitamin C, ascorbic acid, associated with scurvy for people who are deficient in it, which is the poor ability to synthesize collagen. I always think of pirates with scurvy. I think that's what everybody thinks about. So people on ships didn't have access to fruits or vegetables that have vitamin C in them for long periods of time. Or like the European potato famine. Potatoes are actually quite high in vitamin C, so that led to vitamin C deficiencies in those populations, and also in the U.S. Civil War. In modern day, we usually don't see this at all. Most vitamin C supplements out there, most supplements contain massive amounts of vitamin C, more than any one person should ever take in like a week's time period, but that's just what they put in them. Usually it's like 1,000% of your daily recommended amount. Whether you absorb any of that or not is questionable. What does it do? Reducing agent for biological processes involving copper and iron. It's again a cofactor, enzyme complement, antioxidant, and helps with prostaglandin metabolism. Vitamin C is probably one of the most ubiquitous vitamins out there. Tons of people take it. There's actually no real role in therapy that anyone's proven. The biggest thing people associate with vitamin C with is common colds or viruses, and helping with the immune system. Is actually no good evidence this helps. However, there were some studies that maybe pointed to benefit if you took large doses of vitamin C before brief periods of physical stress or possible cold temperature-wise environments or cold exposure. So whether or not that's really true, I don't think the evidence was strong enough to make it one way or another, but it doesn't prevent supplement companies from marketing it that way. So Airborne's a classic one. It's basically vitamin C and Alka-Seltzer that you dissolve in water and drink. And, it's got all these claims making it seem like it fights off. You go on an airplane, you want to don't get other people's germs, so take an Airborne, when in actuality there's zero evidence that actually does anything. So, well, I should say very little evidence, right? Toxicity, very little. This is a water-soluble vitamin. Vitamin C is also in a ton of different products out there. Potatoes, and then a lot of different fruits and vegetables have vitamin C in them. Basically, like from what I understand, one apple or one serving of fruit, of most different types of fruit, is going to be enough vitamin C, probably for most people, for the entire day. So encourage your patients to maybe supplement fruit versus vitamin C supplement. If somebody wants to take vitamin C because they think they're going to get sick otherwise, like if it's cold season or something like that, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just, I don't know, it's a little bit of a false hope there. But things like washing your hands and trying to not be around people who are sick are still much better preventative methods than taking vitamin C. Okay, the B vitamins, there's a few different ones to talk about. B1 is thiamine, which is our first vitamin to deplete upon malnourishment. So alcoholics, anorexics, people status post like GI surgery, are going to become deficient in B1. So if you work in a hospital setting and you work with alcoholic patients, you'll notice the first thing they always get is thiamine. So that's one thing we always assume alcoholics are deficient in. Folic acid is the second thing they get. If you're deficient long term, you can get something called beriberi, which is causes nervous system and cardiovascular issues. And then you can also get some more severe central nervous system problems, and that's Wernicke's Korsakoff, So Wernicke's encephalopathy is something that can lead to something called Korsakoff syndrome. Wernicke's causes encephalopathy, causes oxidative damage, myocardial injury, and ultimately it's associated with severe thiamine deficiency. Korsakoff syndrome almost looks like a schizophrenic picture because you actually have acute neurologic damage at that point, and you can express that as psychosis in certain situations. High dose supplementation is the treatment for Wernicke's or Korsakoff's. You'll often just hear it used combined, like Wernicke-Korsakoff. B2, don't have much to say about this. It's got, just like all these, there's roles in multiple chemical reactions. Toxicity is probably not something we need to consider. B3, there's an interesting deficiency I have on there. Otherwise, I don't really care you know much about it. Other B vitamins. We talked about B12 and folic acid a lot during the anemia lecture, so I'm not going to revisit that here. A lot of B vitamins are included as B complex multivitamins, or a lot of multivitamins just have all the Bs in them. So you don't really have to think about, oh, am I supplementing this one or this one? The only time you really need to think about B vitamins is your malnourished patients and supplementing higher dose thiamine directly. As far as test questions go, for vitamins, I'd just like you to know the basics of them, what they might be used to treat. Most of the stuff we've covered already, and then also knowing which ones are fat soluble. All right, so herbal products. These are biologically based medicines found in nature that are over the counter, and again, fall into the supplement herbal category because they aren't studied. Patients, this is my little quiz for the day. There's some survey data that went out a while ago. A university did a study on this to look at which patients are most likely to use an herbal supplement. So women or men? Women is the correct answer. Over 45 or under 45? Over 45 is the correct answer. Caucasian versus they lumped all their ethnicities together. Caucasian people were more likely to. East or West Coast, that should be an easy one. West Coast. And college or no college? College educated, more likely to use an herbal supplement. Sales for these products are most likely to occur outside of pharmacy or standard retailers. So again, that's why it's important as healthcare providers to engage our patients in conversation, talk about why they're taking the supplement, what they heard about it, if they think it's being effective, maybe lead them to alternatives if you think something might be worth addressing. So for example, if somebody says, well, I started taking St. John's wort because I've just been feeling down, well, maybe have them fill out a PHQ-9, see if they have depressive symptoms, and then talk to them about depression. So those conversations can open the doors to some other therapeutic interventions potentially. This is really old, 2002, but these were the popular supplements then. I'm sure there's better data on this now. If I were to guess, I would say omega-3 is probably the most popular one on this list still. But yeah, I mean, all these things are relatively commonly taken still. Okay. Some things I want to point out, just a couple different herbal products that have some, at least people think they have a use or they have a proven use. Black cohosh has some similar effects to estrogen. I think we talked about this briefly during the women's health lecture, but actually does have some clinical evidence to produce a modest reduction in hot flashes. And again, the label claims they can put on these can relate to perimenopausal symptoms because that's again a stage of standard life stage. It's not a disease, right? So they can talk about those claims and say like reduce hot flashes on their actual label. Cranberry. Cranberry supplements are used to prevent adhesion of bacteria cells to lining in the urinary tract. Whether the supplements in the pill form actually work is very debatable. The studies out there looked at consuming pure cranberry juices, so 10 ounces a day, and they thought that actually did help prevent UTIs in young and older women. Side effects, however, a lot of people felt like the GI side effects were significant. Kidney stones if you take more than 1 liter a day, which that's a ton of cranberry juice. My wife used to buy this stuff, the regular. And the important thing is this isn't the cocktail, right? Because that's not very much juice. It's mostly sugar. And then if you're diabetic, you're going to add a ton of calories if you try to do that. So this really actually has to be pure cranberry juice if you're going to do it. And if you've ever had that, it's really, really sour. So people just might not be willing to take that. So anyway, that's all I have to say about that. Echinacea purpura is a cytokine and white blood cell production effects, at least it's thought to. It might boost the immune system, so some people will take it for preventing or shortening the duration of the common cold, and there's very mixed evidence whether that does anything or not, but that's what people take it for. So I'll leave that sort of up to you whether you want to look into that more or not, but as far as I know, there's not a good push either way, but there is some positive evidence that supports that theory. Garlic. Garlic, a lot of people take garlic for unknown reasons. It doesn't have a known mechanism for why people would use it, but it's thought to have general heart health. Studies have actually looked at a couple different things. Anything cardiovascular, a drug company obviously wants to get on it because those are big money makers usually. Blood pressure reduction was modest, if nothing really at all, and it virtually had no effect on reducing cholesterol. Side effects, you might guess garlic related side effects. It also inhibits platelet aggregation. This is also our first G drug, which a lot of the G supplements or herbal supplements induce CYP enzymes. So it's a great reason not to take garlic, especially if you're on any other medications. It induces CYP3A4, which is one of the most common cytochrome P450 pathways out there. Okay, the next one we're going to talk about is ginkgo. Ginkgo is mostly used for memory impairment, and there's some evidence that it has positive effects on memory and speed of cognitive function. But the older the patient, the more advanced the dementia, the less the effect. This is a CYP inhibitor as well. Ginseng, used for a lot of different things. The most evidence for ginseng is kind of stimulant related, improved mental performance and erectile dysfunction. Side effects, insomnia. Saw palmetto is used for BPH. It's actually thought to inhibit the production of DHT, so the mechanism actually makes sense for this one. The most well-designed studies out there, or the one study that was well-designed, didn't show a lot of benefit with BPH, but there were some smaller studies that compared it favorably to standard BPH medications, so some mixed evidence there. Side effects are minimal. Women shouldn't take this, but a woman, there's not really a reason for a woman to take saw palmetto. St. John's wort may have some influence on GABA, dopamine, and serotonin, which is why it's been used for depression, and it's been shown in a couple different studies to be actually effective for mild depression, more effective than placebo, and equal to low-dose antidepressants. So for the patient looking for an herbal alternative to an SSRI, this might be something to try, but at the same time, there are some side effects that aren't super pleasant. So phototoxicity, agitation, insomnia, anxiety. Other considerations too, you want to avoid it in pregnancy. People can get a discontinuation syndrome with it, just like any psychoactive, or just like most of our psychoactive medications and antidepressants. And it's got quite a few drug interactions too. So a lot of reasons not to use St. John's wort, but you might encounter a patient here or there that wants to try it. Valerian root is used for insomnia and anxiety. There's some evidence that it does improve sleep quality, but takes a few weeks to work. You want to avoid other sedatives with it, and it does have some drug interactions as well. Coenzyme Q10 is thought to be have general enzyme antioxidant properties. Your body does produce coenzyme Q10, but if people are deficient in it, the idea is that supplementing it, you may improve certain things. There is some evidence that it might have some anti-hypertensive effects and improve congestive heart failure symptoms. There's also some studies that show it decreases migraine frequency, so you may see people on it for those things. We talked about the statin link, that people will take it to minimize muscle-related pain, which that's not been proven to help. Side effects with coenzyme Q10 are quite minimal, and overall not something we consider. It may interact with warfarin a little bit, but that's really the only thing to consider with it. Omega-3s, there's a lot of omega-3s out there. Fish oil is probably the most common one, but krill, flaxseed oil, and there's a few others that I'm not going to mention. Mostly thought of as useful for cholesterol management or general heart health, and having anti-inflammatory properties. I see this really commonly used in pretty much every patient. It seems like almost everyone takes an omega-3. But mental health benefits are really questionable. There's not a lot of good studies that show it does anything for mental health conditions, but a lot of mental health patients take these. There was a really large trial in the New England Journal that looked at fish oil versus patients at high risk for CV disease and didn't really show any difference in major endpoints. So some people think that wasn't a super well-designed trial, but again, there's not a lot of evidence that says omega-3s do a ton for anybody's specific disease yet. At the same time, so many people are deficient in omega-3s. Most people don't eat enough fish in our diet or other omega-3 sources to get the omega-3 we need, or are theoretically thought to need. So I almost put it in the vitamin D bucket where we're deficient. So should we supplement it? And if we do, what's the risk? There really isn't. There's no risk in taking this. There's very few side effects associated with omega-3 supplementation. I have heard that I have heard that people will think that this might cause increased bleeding risk, and there is maybe some evidence that there's some anticoagulation properties, but they're very minimal, if anything, so I wouldn't be super concerned with it. And certainly on its own, it doesn't have any appreciable anticoagulation properties. You wouldn't be able to use it just by itself. So summary here, a couple products that are likely effective for at least one condition. The only one we talked about that's probably not effective at all is garlic, and mixed evidence would be black cohosh, saw palmetto, CoQ10, and omega-3. So I would like you to know for the exam, just generally speaking, what each supplement is used for. That garlic isn't effective or hasn't been studied as, I'm sorry, not what each one is used for, but what each one has been proven or has some evidence for efficacy for. Garlic not having any, and then the mixed evidence ones as well. All right, what's an antioxidant? Well, we talked about these basically because I think that this term gets thrown around a lot. Oh, this is high in antioxidants. Everything seems to be an antioxidants of some kind. There are a ton of things out there that we ingest that function as antioxidants, and I put some of these slides in the end because I got a lot of questions about this kind of stuff. I'm not a nutrition expert, so I'm not going to pretend to be, but from what I can understand, that there's not really necessarily a quantifiable amount of antioxidants as a pool. There's lots of different things that you're supposed to ingest on a daily basis, like vitamins, that are antioxidants though. So as far as how much antioxidants you need to drink a certain amount of pomegranate juice a day to prevent cancer. I think the jury's still out on that one. Many products and foods with a lot of benefits out there. So I used to have people send me in suggestions of things to look into, and what I was getting is basically a whole list of superfoods like coconut water and avocados and stuff like that. I'm like, I'm not going to talk about science behind our avocado is good for you. Well, I don't know, probably in some cases, right? Again, I'm not a nutrition specialist, but I think that there's just there's not a lot of evidence to look at for this. Not like somebody studied a bunch of people who ate avocados and a bunch of people that didn't and compared it to a specific disease. Those studies just don't really exist. So there's not really much to say about it other than that, balanced diet, fruits and vegetables probably is going to be better off for you than an unbalanced diet without those things. So they certainly contain stuff that our body needs, but how much and what, and that's all up for debate, I think, and what you really prevent and what's dietary versus maybe genetic and things like that are definitely interesting questions, but not ones that I have the answers to. There's a lot of other herbal stuff out there that I didn't even talk about. Some things I see, like red rice yeast, has some cholesterol lowering properties, at least thought to. I see a lot of people take cinnamon right now for heart health. I'm not sure about the evidence for that one. Turmeric is another big one I see people take, and again, I don't think people necessarily know why they're taking these a lot of the time. And then I just wanted to put in a little part of a slide about homeopathic products. First and foremost, I think people misuse the term homeopathic a lot. They kind of interchange it with herbal. So they might say, "Oh, I'm on some homeopathic stuff." I'm like, "Oh, are you really, or are you just taking saw palmetto?" Well, that's not homeopathic. So homeopathic products are derived from plants, minerals, and animals. So they can really be anything. Homeopathy is really confusing. If you want to read about it, go for it. You probably learn a little bit more than my slide I'll teach you today. But the concepts are very strange. So basically, homeopathy as a core has two things. It says like cures like. So the basic example is that a disease can be cured by a substance that produces similar symptoms in healthy people. So let's say you have high blood pressure. Well, if I don't have high blood pressure and I use caffeine, it gives me high blood pressure, then you take caffeine and your blood pressure should go down. Makes no sense. We know that doesn't happen. So, and obviously caffeine's not a homeopathic product, but that's what they would think, is that these homeopathic products would work this way. The other thing is something called a law of the minimum dose, the notion that a lower dose of the medication gives you greater efficacy, which again is fundamentally wrong as far as everything we know about physics and biology. So interestingly, some homeopathic products, what they do is they dilute, they claim that's how they make them. They take the product and dilute it out in water a certain number of times to the point where it's basically, the original substance is so diluted that it's undetectable. And they'll talk about things like water memory. The water remembers it had the substance in it, which, again, just sounds crazy, for lack of a better term. I don't understand the concepts here. I'm not sure how anyone with the science, and I'm not trying to be all Western medicine and anti this, but I do think homeopathy is very strange, and that there's just not, it falls in the category of a pseudoscience, and there's not anything here that jives with fundamental laws of nature that we understand and know as people who have backgrounds in science. So in case you're wondering, homeopathic products don't have respectable evidence supporting their use. And again, just be careful with the word, because saying you're on, if somebody's like, "Oh, I'm on a bunch of homeopathic stuff," well, what does that exactly mean? That's a different thing than what we just talked about, and I won't do any more talking about that, because you could really go down the rabbit hole with homeopathy if you wanted to. All right, so that's the lecture. Again, what I'd really want you to know is the vitamins, their basic uses, which ones are fat soluble, supplements, or the herbal supplements, what they have evidence for, or not at all. So that's it. There'll be a handful of questions. They should all be pretty straightforward. If you listen to this lecture, I have no doubt in my mind that you'll probably be able to answer them with relative ease. So that's it.